Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of Hack for a Cause. We have another very exciting day prepared for you, full with plenary discussions, different insights as will just follow. And also there will be a design sprint again on the SDG 4 of education. So next up on stage is Robin, our dear shaper from the Frankfurt Global Shaper Hub, who will give you some insights on the collaboration potential between startups and corporations.
Coming all the way back, because I hadn't had a presenter. So, welcome, good morning. Nobody tired? No! You're the only one. Nobody tired? Okay, it's 9 o'clock. We try again at 9:50. Yeah, welcome to the session to talk about entrepreneurship, about technology, and the role of startups and corporates, and how they can collaborate to come up with something really beautiful. But before we start looking into this topic in detail, I want to give you some more inspirational overview of what is actually happening, why the world is changing, and how we can drive it. And for this, I've prepared 3 parts. So the first part is looking on the new kids on the block. So what are the new business models? What is happening out there? Why are they successful? And what can we learn from that? Second part is about changing. And it's not about changing once. It's about changing twice. And I will explain in a minute what that means. And then ultimately, I want to give you a couple of case studies and a couple of ideas on how collaboration between corporates and startups can actually work. So before we start, the room looks pretty young. Who's working for a corporate? There's a corporate people, startup people, startup people, and the rest is just here to chill, right? Fantastic. Okay, let's get started. So we have new rules in place. The world is changing, new business models are occurring, and the way we are doing business and the way our economy is working completely changed over the last years. And it's changing rapidly. So just think about a simple thing like the iPhone or any other smartphone that you're probably having with you. It's just 11 years or 10 years old, however you want to put it. And just by having this one piece of technology, the whole world fundamentally changed. Who was thinking about apps 15 years ago, more or less? Using them everyday life, taking pictures wherever we are, sharing them wherever we are. It's a beautiful thing, and it is something that our traditional business models are not used to cope with. And we have still to explore them yet. And the next slide, I hope you have seen it at every tech conference. It's a boring slide, but I think it's a good slide to cap it up. So like all the big tech players that we quite often talk about, they don't have assets anymore. They're just leveraging their services. And they're putting the customer into the center of their business model. And one of the fascinating things about business models nowadays is that every asset is becoming a commodity. Literally everything is becoming a commodity. Even ideas for new businesses, even ideas to solve problems, they are all becoming commodities. So if you are working here on any specific topic, you type it in Google, and chances are pretty high that someone already did it. Because the world is so connected, and we can change so much information and make use out of this. So everything is becoming a commodity, so we have to find new ways in these business models. And if you have been here yesterday, when we had the session on impact, we have learned that there's also a huge potential within these new business models, from circular economy programs, from bringing people together that haven't been together before, and to see the world more holistically. Because that's what they are all doing, right? And if you just look at this example of Uber, driving a taxi is not the product that you want. You don't want anybody having a taxi if you want to go from A to B. The pure desire for you to taking an Uber or a taxi service is to go from A to B. You actually don't care how you get there. It should be fast, or it should be cheap, or it should be reliable, but the best case, it's exactly there where you are. And that's what Uber is doing, literally. And all these new business models, I think there are 3 reasons why they are really successful. And the first one is putting the customer at the center. We always call this customer centricity. That's the magic word, right? I'm not a huge fan of the word customer centricity per se, but listening to the people, seeing what they are doing, understanding their needs, understanding their problems, their everyday challenges, and then coming up with something that solves that. That's fundamentally what we're doing. And if you have been to one of our design dashes yesterday or stay for another design dash today, you will see how easy it is to even come up in a 50-minute session with something that is fundamentally changing something. So stay for that if you're interested in that. Second reason is most new business models make things way simpler. And by simpler, I don't mean like not superior in these terms, right? It's about making things simpler, making them easier, making them more transparent. Also, if we look into circular economy topics, into blockchain business models, it's all about simplicity, taking out the noise of the complexity and cutting through it, making life easier, simpler, more convenient. This is the way we are living. But at the same time, we also have to be conscious about making things simpler, because convenience comes at a price. Yeah? We wrap peeled oranges in plastic. We separate egg yolks and sell them separately in plastic. Convenience always comes at a price, so we have to be really conscious about that. And that's a really important thing in new business models as well. And third reason, what I find really, really interesting when we work with our startups, especially in our tech hub, is they always try to create in some way more value for not just one person, but for many. They have a more holistic view, a multi-stakeholder view on the world. And this is really interesting because as soon as you start exploring target groups, stakeholders around your core target groups, you find beautiful things that you probably haven't seen before. You can leverage your assets, you can leverage your ideas, you can leverage what you're doing. And this is becoming really interesting then from a holistic business model perspective. And these are my 3 main reasons why I think new business models are taking off and how they are going to change the world in some way. So from this new business model, it always seems to be easy to just come up with them. But when we really want to change something and if we want to keep up, the question is, how do we keep actually up? How do we keep up with all the change that is happening? And we have actually to challenge the status quo of the world. Everything is changing. And I deeply believe in that there are only 2 problems in this world existing. The ones that are global and the ones that are local. And there are many of them. We can't talk about climate change. We can't talk about emissions and stuff like that on a country basis. We have to take it globally. It doesn't make sense to build green cities in Western Europe on the back of cobalt mining workers in Africa. It doesn't work. We can't drive our Teslas and make people die in these mines. This is not a sustainable world. But we have to challenge this. We have to look globally at the things. And if we look into local problems, we can't even talk about nations anymore. We are talking about ecosystems. Even in Germany, a city like Berlin has completely different challenges compared to Frankfurt, Munich, Manama, Dubai. Whatever city you look at, we have completely different challenges. And we have to address them locally, but always keep in mind that there's the global spectrum of it. And this is interesting, because that challenges on how we are coming up with the next wave of innovation. Because innovation is just one little part of change. The second part is perception, the way we want to see the world. And these are 2 fundamental differences, and we have to address them both. But let's look into innovation first. And I always call this the innovation trap, because when we talk about innovation, it's often that we might try to make things faster, better, superior, whatever. And this is something that is only purely based on attributes. Innovation is all about attributes, understanding what is the desire of the people. There's this famous quote from Ford when he invented the car, and he always said, like, and this is a masterpiece on understanding customer centricity and innovation from an attribute perspective. He literally said, If I would have asked people what they want, they would have said a faster horse. And I would have never invented a car. And this is true in many domains, but this is actually not what the people were saying. People were saying, I want to go faster from A to B. That's the attribute of mobility, right? Moving people from A to B. They didn't know that the cars are existing. They couldn't express this, so they used the word horse to refer to something that should bring them faster from A to B. So listening to the people and understanding what they're talking about is fundamentally important. So don't take the word for granted, but understand what's underlying it. What are the attributes that the people are actually talking about? And then we probably come up with something that is way better than a car, right? It could be also a bicycle and stuff like that. People just wanted to get faster from A to B. And how we're getting there is pretty simple. It's experimenting. And you probably have all heard about the build, measure, learn iteration. It's also the approach that we're taking with our design dashes. It's pretty simple. We just try to figure out what the problem is, come up with something simple, measure if it makes sense, if it is working, and then do it all over again. All over again, all over again, all over again, all over again. And this is basically being a startup. You try to be better every single day in some way. Even simple inventions like the light bulb, they didn't come out of nowhere. It took let's not talk about Edison, yeah, and not talk about stealing innovation and stuff like that. But if we refer to that in this way, it was probably 1,000, 2,000 attempts before he came up with the light bulb. And that's what's always going on with innovation. We're trying things out. And we don't have to be ashamed if something doesn't work out. We just have to show it to people and get feedback, gather feedback. And when we look into corporates, I think this is the fundamental or where most innovation fails in large companies is that they are not getting out with something that is not yet ready. And this is a fundamental difference to a startup because they are doing it all the time. And the reason is pretty simple. You don't have so much time that you can wait for 2 years before you come up with a prototype. You don't have the money, you don't have the time, you don't have the resources. So you have to iterate all the time. And probably you know also this quote from PayPal, from Max Levchin. He actually founded 5 companies. And the 5th one was PayPal. And before that, he literally said the first one doomed, the second one was a little bit better, third one okay-ish, fourth one was doing well, and the 5th one was PayPal. So it is a journey. It's something that we need to enjoy. It's something that is not easy. But we need to keep going. We need to push through these things. And innovation is never easy. But let's look more at the interesting part of perception. Perception is literally the illusion of our reality. It's how we describe and see the world. And everybody has a different perception. It's due to the fact that we are all raised with different cultural backgrounds, with different stories, with different facts. And when I was a child, my mother always said this to me: don't sit too close to the TV or you will go blind. Now it's 2018, 19, and we are using our Oculus VR glasses just in front of us. We're staring the whole time at our screens in the length of an arm. How many of you are blind? It's okay, right? So we can sit in front of that. But this is a typical example of how perception is working. It's something that we have learned and take for granted without challenging it. And we need actually to challenge the whole world, everything. Because perception is coming up from facts and the stories that we heard. So we have knowledge, we know something, yes, this is a fact, and we know we have stories. And somewhere in between is our reality. And the thing is, even our facts are not true all the time, right? For years, we were thinking that the speed of light is the fastest thing that we have on this little planet or in our universe. Now, in CERN, they found out, oh, it gets even faster. So a fact, a scientific fact that we took for granted for years is now outdated. And this is literally what we're doing as human beings. We are progressing. We're getting with new facts, we're getting new insights, we're doing our research, and then we come up with something new. And that's how the world is changing, how our perception is changing. And if we look into the whole digital sphere, this is something that is quite new to us, right? The internet is something we all have experienced in our lifetime. It was not there. And most people in this room grew up with it. It's a fundamental life part of it. And if you look into generations that are a little bit older, they had to learn it, right? So it's something that newly came up. And the way we are communicating is changing dramatically. So the perception of communication is completely new in the 21st century. We're just texting with smileys, and now the next thing is GIFs, right? So not even text, no punctuation. It's gone. We don't need it, because the rules of communication have massively changed. But still, in some way, we try to stick to the old rules. So what is the next thing coming up? What's the next story? What's the next fact that is changing our perception? And the beautiful part is, like conference like this, you have people from all around the world coming together, having their own perception of reality, and this is a pure source of inspiration, of gold, of insights, to improve our own view onto the world. And perception is created in this pretty simple module, right? So what we think influences what we say influences what we do, and what we do ultimately influences how we are perceived. So if I'm, as a company, saying all the time, I'm super innovative, chances are that I become super innovative, because the perception is triggered. If I'm not telling that, if I'm saying, like, I'm not a good company, I'm probably not a good company. It's all changing. Everything that we're doing is creating something new in our heads. And this is beautiful and dangerous at the same time. The question is, why is it for us human beings so difficult to change? And why do we struggle to change our perception of the world? And this is due to Mother Nature, because we are born with some really nice things in our brains that actually make us capable of living on this planet and coping with all the things that are happening around us. But there's three things, like the habits, our autopilots, the cognitive load that is exploding on us, and our mental models that help us navigate the world. And if we look into habits, there are a lot of apps now, and a lot of trends, people talking about we need to create new habits, new behavioral patterns. And it's really difficult, and we need habits, but you need to be aware of your habits. We have habits actually to steer through our world, right? So if you're driving the car every day from your home to work, you don't think about it, you just do it, right? You can text and phone and listen to music, probably read a book, all the stuff that you shouldn't do, but you can do it because it's autopilot. You're not thinking about it. If you're going to a new city and drive the car there, then sometimes it gets a little bit stressy. New traffic rules, you don't know the streets, you don't know where to go, turn left or right. So you have to be conscious about what you're doing. And 90% of the day, roughly, we are running on autopilot. Who of you is thinking about breathing? Nobody. You just do it when you meditate, right? It's just there. It's a survival function. If you would have to think about every breath you're taking, you would go crazy. Your brain would explode. And we do the same in business life. We do the same when we talk about innovation. We do the same when we are talking about collaboration. 90% of the things are based on our habits. So finding our own patterns and understanding how we are behaving in certain situations is the first step to change. It's the first step towards a new perception of the world that we're looking at. Second thing is cognitive biases. And I know this slide is horribly to read, and I don't want to go through all of this because this would be probably 2 weeks of conference to go through all the cognitive biases, but it shows pretty nicely how our brain is working. We have so many misinterpretations of the world, so many things in our brains going on that we can't explain. And one that I like a lot is the default effect. And the default effect literally says, if you don't know what to do what you have done before, right? So in times of uncertainty, we try to stick with the stuff that we already have done before. And that's the problem when we talk about innovation, collaboration, new things, because it's all new. We always have to think about it. We always have to challenge things. It's exhausting. It's like sports. It's like bench presses for your brain, right? You go to the gym for your arms, and you do innovation for your brain, because that's how it works. And if this is not alone enough for our brain to cope with, we also have our cognitive load. And cognitive load is basically learning. So we learn a lot of stuff, especially in conferences like that. We spend 2-3 days listening to a lot of interesting things. We're sitting in sessions like, oh, this is super interesting, I have to remember that. And 3 days after the conference, like, oh gosh, what have you said? What was it? because we can't cope with all the information that are around us. Information is literally everywhere. Knowledge is literally everywhere. So how do we cope with the things, and what do we remember? What should we remember? What is important to us? And ultimately, our mental models. And this is the part where we have also to look into technologies. If you look, for example, into artificial intelligence, and thanks, Laura, for this comment yesterday on stage that is probably on PowerPoint, but if we look into probably more like a machine learning approach, if you give a machine a picture of an elephant, it doesn't see an elephant. It sees data, right? We only see an elephant on a picture of an elephant because we all agreed on that it's an elephant. It's a mental model. A computer, we can teach them everything. We can say like, oh, is this gray and white dots or pixels or whatever? I'll probably come up with something completely new. And understanding that there's a lot of things in our society that we have agreed on makes it difficult to change patterns. And this is sometimes why people say like, hey, why are you so crazy? And it's like, yeah, mental models, huh? It's okay. So I hope from this little introduction into innovation and perception, it becomes clear that when we start changing our perception of the world, innovation becomes way easier because we find things that are not obvious in the beginning. That's a lot with creativity, right? Breaking out of your patterns, breaking out of your routines, looking into new ways of doing things. And I want to encourage you all, when you leave for this conference, try to identify what are your own perceptions of the world. How do you see your world? How do you see your daily work? What is stopping you from being more innovative? What is stopping you from being more collaborative with startups and more innovative topics? So, looking at the core topic of this presentation, corporate and startup collaboration. It's a beautiful thing. So I'm running a tech entrepreneurship center in Berlin, and also a university that is focusing on leadership and technology topics in Barcelona. And we're working a lot with corporates and startups alike. And the funny thing is, when we talk with startups, they always say something like this: you don't want to work with me, and you make my life complicated. That's always what they say to corporates. And do you know what the corporates are saying? Exactly the same. They're literally saying exactly the same. They both want to work together, but they don't understand each other. And that's why it is making it so hard. So understanding a startup is actually pretty complex. But I try to make it a little bit tangible. So that's the way a startup normally operates and looks like. So when you're an early time founder, you're searching for a problem solution fit, right? So you don't have an idea what you're actually doing. You try to run the show, you try to keep up, you try to find at least $1 on the streets to pay your salaries next month, right? You're struggling, you're running around, and you don't have time for complex processes, you don't have time for a lot of negotiations. You want to meet with people and say like, hey, this is what we're doing, do you want to work with us? Yes. And then move on and move on and move on. And as soon as the startup is starting to grow, they are becoming even more complex because they are then starting to build their own structures. They are trying to find their market. They're trying to figure out what the right partners are. And if I'm, as a large company, go to a startup and say like, hey, we want to do this proof of concept for the next 2 years, not knowing what is going to happen in the end, I, as a startup that is still looking for my product and the market that I'm serving, I'm feeling a little bit like uncomfortable, to be honest. Because I don't want to waste 2 years on a proof of concept just to figure out it doesn't make sense. I want to be faster, more agile. And if you look at the corporate perspective, it's pretty much the same, but different. Because in a corporate, as an executive, I have the problem that I have to drive profits, I'm stuck in hierarchies in some way, I need to report to a controlling department or financial accounting, I have privacy issues. It's not like, hey, here's some data, do something with that. It's not working, especially with the new GDPR guidelines that we have in Europe. And also, it's a lot about planning. Corporates are still running on budget planning. So if I'm not hitting exactly the moment where an executive is planning his budgets, I probably have to wait for a year, or hope that another project fails that I can dive into. So it's really structured and it's good. Large companies only work because they have processes. Everything that we hate as startups makes a company successful. And when we work with large companies, they always say like, oh, we want to be more like startups. And I was like, no, you don't want to be like a startup. It's a total mess. You have to figure out everything by yourself. And as a startup, then they say like, oh, we never want to be like a corporate. I say like, you really want to be like a corporate, because then you get the structures, then you get your daily routines, then you can be productive, right? We need these processes, we need these structures to be successful in a large company. And these two worlds are clashing all the time. It's good that we have different types of working, and it's good to inspire each other, but this collaboration part is quite often really difficult because we don't understand each other and we don't know how to get out of this trap being stuck in either corporate processes or the startup growth path. And that's why I think that for this collaboration part, we need something that is put onto a green field. We can't do corporate innovation within the corporate infrastructure. It doesn't work. You always have the problems of budgeting, you always have the problems of reporting, you always have the problems of other projects kicking in. You need a greenfield for that. You need a unit that is just dedicated to do that, right? You have a physical space probably, you have the resources there, you have the money there, and you say like, okay, this is our corporate innovation part, we're putting $1 million, 10 million, whatever in there, and just do whatever you want with that, right? If it's gone, it's gone. If something good comes out, it's fantastic. If not, then it's also okay. That's the way we need to approach it on this perspective. But the other problem there is there are actually no low-hanging fruits, and that's also something that we quite often hear from startups and corporates alike. We need to approach the low-hanging fruits of our collaboration. But it's not existing. It's literally not existing. When we talk about collaboration, there's no low-hanging fruit. If startups and corporates are talking about low-hanging fruits in their collaboration, what they mean is a service contract. I buy your product. But this is not collaboration. We are talking here about doing something together. And the reason for that is collaboration is always a multiplication. It's not linear. And don't be afraid by all the boxes on the slide. It looks a little bit messy, but this is basically what it is. So to be successful in startup and corporate collaboration, you first of all need a shared vision. What do we want to do together? Where do we want to get? What do we want to achieve? You need the right skills on the startup side and also on the corporate side. You have to incentivize the people. How do they participate? What do you do as a corporate if a startup is collaborating with one of your employees and they're doing a new spin-off? Do they get shares? Yes or no? Do they get paid? Yes or no? Who's owning the invention? Yeah? What is the things there? We need the right incentive structure. We need the resources, like money, manpower, legal structures, whatever we have, and ultimately an action plan, because otherwise it's just purely not existing and not happening. We need to focus on these things. And then we have collaboration. And whatever you go through, if one of those elements is missing, you end up with either confusion, anxieties, resistance, frustration, or a false start. It's a multiplication. If one thing is nil, everything is nil. You need all of them, and you need to address them all. So how do you do that? Well, that's the corporate infrastructure, right? You set up a process for that. It's simple. Corporates know how to do that. But we do need the execution part in the end. And I'm a big fan of creating these spaces. As I said earlier, you need a green space for that, a green field. And it could be physical, it could be digital, whatever it is, but you need the space where everybody can come together to do this, to execute these things. And it should be a priority. If it's not a priority, don't start at all. It's really important that if you want to embrace collaboration between corporates and startups alike, it's really important that we get together and work on eye level, that not one person is taking it from a different perspective, that the corporate doesn't have a pure ego-driven agenda in the background. And the same is true for the startup. They shouldn't just run around the world trying to get the next innovation award or whatever to get a 20K grant, but to really drive something together, to really work on something bigger than the tiny little parts. And then collaboration happens, and then beautiful things will be created. And I just want to show you a quick slide on how this could look like in practice. And this is a program we set it up with a large German car manufacturer that was looking to collaborate with startups on creating new business models for their own business units. And the interesting part there is what we have created is basically a greenfield and own innovation center, more or less, that is split into two parts. And we are calling them acceleration phase and incubation phase. The incubation phase being the first phase. What we're doing there, over a course of 3 months, we sent 48 successful entrepreneurs to this company to work with the employees internally on ideas that they are having. They are coaching them, they are working together with them, they're giving them all the tools on coming up with a new startup, on how to kickstart ideas. And if things that are evolved in this program are successful, we put them into a full 3 months acceleration phase. And in this phase, that's the first moment where money is spent into an idea. So the first 3 months are completely, purely focused on iterating, learning, understanding each other, understanding how to work, understand the mindset behind it. And in the next 3 months in the acceleration phase, you get basically the money that you need for that. It's pretty simple. You don't have to go to an investor or whatever, but you pitch the idea together with the startup and the internal employee that is having the idea in front of the management board to get your funding for that. And then you work again 3 months full-time together. And for a startup, this is also really attractive because 3 months is a time period that I can understand because I'm getting paid for that as well. So working in this 3 month period is actually pretty nice for the startup and also for the internal employee to come up with something that then might be the next innovation level of the organization. And the beautiful part there is as soon as you put these two people together, one from the internal company and one from a startup, you create better structures for the companies that they are working on, because on the one side you have like the understanding on how to set up a large company, and on the other side you have like this more agile, more dynamic perspective on how to iterate with things. And it's pretty interesting what we see when they are collaborating. They are often doing hardware stuff because it's German engineering, right? We can only do engineering, not services. So they're doing this hardware prototypes, and the beautiful thing is the corporate side is always improving it in details that a startup never thinks about. Things like legal structures, things like security, things like making it possible to use, right? So the things that we are often lacking in a startup is we are working on something without seeing the whole consequence about it, right? So when Uber first started in Germany, it was a disaster, because it was not legal to do. Same with Airbnb. There are huge discussions going on that you can now even lose your property if you're using Airbnb in Germany, right? So it's crazy from a legal perspective. These are the things that you as a startup normally don't see, because you first of all don't have the time to do that, and secondly you don't have the money to pay all these lawyers around the world that are charging you just by looking at them, right? So it's impossible. And bringing these resources, these different kind of skills, and the bigger vision together really creates something that has the value and has the potential to actually shape our world for the better. I'm a huge fan of that, so I was always an entrepreneur myself, always funded my own companies, always did the whole drill of funding money and talking with investors, trying to figure out how to pay the bills the next month, so all the shitty stuff that you have to do as an entrepreneur. I'm deeply believing in that the next wave, the next future of innovation will come from corporate and startup collaboration. And probably we will have a new form of how that will look like. Because in some way I also think like this hype of being a startup is in some way over. Not everybody wants to be a startup anymore. We want to be entrepreneurs. And being an entrepreneur is something completely different. It's a mindset, it's a lifestyle, it's pushing through things. And it's not just fundamentally being a startup. Because what's a startup anyway? What's a startup? Is it the number of people? Is it number of funding? Is it growth? Is it age? What's a startup? There are millions of definitions, and I don't like any of them. Because when we start a company, we are a company. Simple put, just different challenges. And this is the entrepreneurial mindset, building something. We are not starting as entrepreneurs to be a startup. We are starting as entrepreneurs to build the next thing that the world either will change or make us horribly rich, right? That's why you start a company. And I hope that most entrepreneurs in the future will choose the first part on doing something good for our planet and coming up with something really nice. So please, if you are a corporate, go out and do something for the startup world, get all the good entrepreneurs, work together with them, and then we can together really change the world. Thank you so much. We have time for some questions. Any questions? Yeah, in the middle. There's a microphone coming.
I just wonder if you have experienced these matching of corporate and entrepreneurs, and have it been successful?
Examples of where it works? Can you repeat the question? I didn't quite understand it.
Yeah, to what extent you practiced this combination of corporates and entrepreneurs? How many times and which kind of success did you yield out of it?
Yeah, so with this program that I was just showcasing quite shortly, we have created 36 companies with the corporate together over the course of 2 years. We are working basically with all large German companies on that, stuffing entrepreneurs into their training, coaching, and innovation programs. So for us, it's also, if you look into entrepreneurial landscape, so you have a lot of founders that either sold their shares or doing something new now, so we always put them into our programs as well. So we are not sourcing internal resource from us, but we are looking for entrepreneurs that want to work with large companies. And so we're doing this now for roughly 4 years. We have worked with over 50 companies and over 250 entrepreneurs all over Europe, so from Berlin to Barcelona to Lisbon. So we are purely focusing on Europe at the moment. But the collaboration is working pretty well, and if you look into the infrastructure that is set up by large companies right now, everybody has some kind of acceleration program, incubation program, co-working lab, whatever. But I think many times the problem why they're not working is that they're lacking some kind of overall vision and strategy behind it, a little bit from the chart, what makes successful collaboration, and that they are often still stick in their own bubble. So they see more like the startup as some kind of resources that they're taking into an innovation hub or whatever, and then see what's happening, but are not actually getting into this dialogue, into this mode of collaboration, where there's really something happening together, right? It's the same like when companies talk about being a pioneer in the startup world and they're just doing like seed or VC investments, which is good. I don't say that it's bad, but it's not the part about collaboration, right? So if you want to collaborate, you really need to have this action plan where things are getting together and where you are an active part of it, not just sourcing startups and taking them for something. Does that answer the question? Okay. Question in the front?
Good morning. Thank you very much for a very enlightening presentation. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Would you agree with me, I mean, just thinking loudly with you, that before we run and go globally, we need to organize our base. So we need really locally to take care of all the challenges we have and clear them, and then we move forward up the ladder, because if we don't do that, we will tumble on our way somehow. Because you see, we are always, I represent the SME society in Bahrain. I have my friend, Doctor, is also SME. We are a lot of SME people here who are excited about trying to help our entrepreneurs. But we really need to make sure that they don't, then they are really well educated, well prepared, know exactly the path they have to go through, where they go, and then they don't face barriers. You know, there are a lot of bureaucracies here and there, and those bureaucracies sometimes hit you in the face, and that delays you. And then some of our young people, they fail,
Yeah.
which is okay. You have to fail, and then you stand up again, and you fail and stand up. But eventually, and we all hope that they really succeed, and that's the whole idea. We don't want to lose our young people who are like over 70% of the population. If they don't succeed, our country will fail. So we really feel that we really need to do about to take care of our local affairs before we move up the ladder. What do you think?
Yeah, really interesting question. I would agree in some extent. I think it's always really important to have the base fixed and that the base is really stable. For me, it's highly depending on what kind of business you want to be. If you just want to build a big business, then you probably should think global from minute number one. But if you really want to have impact and really want to do something really good, and I hope that most business models in the future will also serve a higher purpose, because we are probably the last generation to fix this planet anyway, right? So everything after us, doomsday. But if we want to work on this, and if we are supporting this entrepreneurial mindset of really doing something good and creating impact that is larger than just money and making a large business, then we always should focus on the local ecosystem first, because we also need it, because that's the part of every challenge, or the challenge that we're having is either global or local or both. And if we have it locally addressed, then we can scale it up into the world. And I'm also a deep believer in that you need strong local ecosystems, because that's where you get your source of inspiration. Even if you're a company that is operating globally, you need like a local ecosystem where you get your inspiration, where you can have a discussion with the people, where you get fresh insights, where you can have a trustworthy or a trustful conversation where you don't have to worry about these things. And this starts on the whole. So when we build ecosystem, it's always about people. And you need to find the incentives for people to be part of an ecosystem. And creating these incentives is quite often putting people in a simple room and just say, hey, have fun and discuss these topics that you're interested in. And if we can create this, then we can also tackle the larger topics. Because if you have nothing where you can hold on to, you will leave for somewhere else, right? So I would definitely agree in some extent. If you really want to build something strong, you should also focus on what you're doing locally, especially from a governmental perspective as well. But if you are a company that just wants to go big and scale up, then you probably should go internationally from minute number one. And I also think, like looking a little bit like at Bahrain or Germany, for example, if we portray these countries, from a Bahraini perspective, it's probably way easier to talk in a country perspective. For Germany, it doesn't make sense in my view, because, as I said, a city like Berlin has completely different challenges compared to Frankfurt, Munich, or Hamburg, because these are different ecosystems. And this is due, and especially in Europe, I mean, you know how Europe looked like 100 years ago. It was pretty cluttered. It has their own cultural things. And we're seeing that we're getting more and more into like this mindsets again, right? If you're looking into Hamburg, for example, we have this Hanseatic mentality and this Hanseatic way of doing business. It's completely different to what we know from a city like Munich. So we should, and I'm deeply believing in this local ecosystems that is based on what we are believing in this, and then scaling up from there. But for Bahrain, it's probably the whole island, because it's way smaller from size, right? So there's a question, and there's a question.
Thank you, Robin, for the presentation. In your experience, what is the point of view from the corporate to integrate with startups and having the startup kind of working for the corporate, or having the startup having a minority stake equity on the startup and allowing the startup to grow beyond being like a customer only?
Yeah, this is exactly the part of what I was mentioning for the first question, is we have to distinguish between collaboration and service contracts, right? So if a corporate just sees a startup as a service provider or as a free source of a brain, then it doesn't make sense. So this collaboration always has to be on this on this eye level. And what I was saying was the program that I was quickly portraying, when the large company decides to do a spin-off, then everybody will be participating. This is like the incentive structure from the collaboration chart. And this is really important, that if you get into these ventures that you know what's going to happen in the end, right? So it should be clear, if you as a startup are working with a large company, that you know from the minute you're starting collaborating what will happen in the end. What will happen to the things that you're developing in your workshops, what's going to happen to the products that you're developing, to the services and everything around it. And it could be everything. It could be like a pure payment, that's fine. It could be share structures, it could be a joint venture thing, whatever it is. So the setup of the structure, and I think this is something that a lot of startups don't see when they work with large companies. At least it was in my perspective exactly that, because you're like, oh wow, this large company wants to work with me, now everything is going to be good, and you forget to question what's behind that. So questioning what's behind that and having a clear answer as a corporate is really important for that. And then working on a fair level is really important. Does it answer the question? We have 2 more questions over there. And I think there was also a question in the back, right? You can go ahead because you were first.
Well, thank you. You've just answered my question now. It was all about whether it's a share in the new venture or whether it's payment for services. You know, from your own experience, some examples of how it normally works. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just want to add the last 2 questions and your answers. I'm Monor from Bangladesh. I'm the managing director for a venture capital. Opportunity is there, so if we can connect digitally the young generation, the young entrepreneur, that it doesn't have to be a team in one country. It could be a Western and Southern. They can discuss few issues they want to solve. That could create the huge opportunity for ecosystem wide, because sometimes the country level startup idea level resources is not available, mentor is not available, but global ecosystem can really help them and bring them in a totally different perspective.
Yeah, would totally agree on that. It's also a lot about the question how governmental structures and company structures are set up. I know that there are a lot of countries that have great governments that are driving the change in their countries, and then there are other countries where industry and economy is driving the changes in the country. Both is good and both is bad in their own way, right? So everything has an advantage and a disadvantage. So yes, absolutely, if a country is driven by governmental decisions and if the government is willing to shape things, that's fantastic, also if you have cross-collaboration. But countries that are heavily relying on the industry to make changes happen, also from a funding perspective, right? There are whole countries where when you want to start something, there's no governmental support, right? You just have to work with the industry. Then the change is always coming from there. So it's always the question of what countries are these, what governmental structures are these, and how is the economy, or what is the economy based on? You have a next question?
Hi, yeah.
Okay.
Just building off that last question, actually. If the future of innovation lies in these collaborations between startups and corporates,
Sorry, can you put the microphone a little bit closer? Because I don't, yeah, thank you.
What is the role of governments, if there is a role, to incentivize and better facilitate these collaborations?
Okay, a beautiful question. So just looking at Germany, right? So I can't speak for the whole globe. But if I look into Germany, so I'm always quite frustrated with governmental initiatives because they look good on paper, but the execution part is, let's say, not really there. We have like this hub initiatives in Germany where different industry verticals were put into different cities. It's a total mess, right? When you're a mobility startup sitting in Hamburg and your mobility hub is in Munich, it's like, okay, gosh, what's happening here? This decentralized structure, and this is a typical German thing, like we are always trying to decentralize everything. If you, for example, look into the city of Paris, where it's basically everything, right? So everything that is happening around startup culture in France is happening in Paris. It's deeply centralized, and people are coming together. And it's a little bit related also to this question of how do you build the ecosystem, how do you build the base? Are you going more with a decentralized or centralized approach? Both, again, has advantages and disadvantages. But I deeply believe in that government can only put like the overall vision for it, but industry has to put it in, right? Because as a government, what are you interested in a government, right? So there's no one business that you should focus on, because you have to focus on everything. But setting up like the infrastructure, like in Paris with Station F that you're having, so like creating the space, creating the base for innovation, and then letting industry participate in that and putting value into the collaboration, it makes so much more sense than trying to facilitate everything from a governmental structure. Because a healthcare startup will always be more happier with a healthcare company than rather the healthcare department of a government, because it's a different level of where we are addressing things. Does it answer the question? Perfect. So we have 45 seconds left. But we have one more question here. So this is the last question. Last chance. Microphone is coming from, yeah, perfect.
Hi, I'm Noha from Bahrain Development Bank, and we do support both corporates and startups in terms of coaching, funding, and incubation. So my question is, what do you think is the success factor of an incubator? Because we've seen many success stories, and some people just give up and leave. So what do you think it is that we should do to help?
Yeah, so I think it's a more general answer, not just specifically to incubation. So I think mentoring, coaching is always good. What I personally don't like about most incubation programs and also acceleration programs in the world is that they are too narrowly bounded from an industry perspective or a tech vertical. So you have like an artificial intelligence incubator, you have a blockchain accelerator, whatever. I think it's really important to have diversity in these programs, because you can always learn so much from your peers that are in different industry verticals. So for example, there's a large German bank that has an own incubation program, and they were always looking for fintechs. They only had fintechs, and literally all of the startups in this program were not a fit to their business, because they figured out sooner or later every bank is a fintech, so why should we buy it? We have to be it by ourselves. And then they had a startup that is doing document management systems in the incubation. It was a huge success. So something that they were not looking at in the beginning became their only success case. And I think not looking into what you are and trying to figure something out around what you are, so like being a bank, finding fintechs, but being in this diverse communities, trying to figure out what else is out there, and trying to connect things that are not connected yet often has more impact, and also for the startups that are, for example, in the incubation program. If there's a healthcare startup that can mingle with a software startup, they will learn from each other. And if there's another startup that is doing 3D printing, that's also good, because then you have some engineering perspectives, you have some software perspectives, and probably have some product design perspectives, right? So like making it as diverse as possible, I think is the best thing. And then also really understanding what kind of startups you're taking in. And this is probably the biggest challenge, that you try with your batch to really have a group of people that are in the same stage yet, right? So if a startup is still looking for a problem solution fit, and another startup is looking for a product market fit, and they are in the same program, they are so far away so that they can't really help them. So like really understanding where's the startup from a progress and a growth perspective, and then putting them together in a batch really helps. Does it answer the question? Fantastic. All right, so time is out. It says it on the screen. Please stay with us. We are continuing straight away with the next keynote from Laura and Emmanuel. So I see Emmanuel, but I don't see Laura. Oh, in the back. Come over. Take over the stage. I start your slides if the slides are there. No, slides are not here. 1 second. Please don't leave. It will be fantastic. It will be fun. Because now you get 2 speakers. It's always better than 1 speaker. And Robbie Williams said it, but we are here for your entertainment, right? Emmanuel, take over the stage. Here's the
Yes.
presenter.
However, Laura
Have fun.
will take the start. Thank you very much, Robin.
Thank you. Got it?
Let's take that. Fangen wir direkt an? So no intro music for us? Okay. Why is education important? In order to tackle this issue, I would like all of you to do an experiment with me. Please close your eyes. I promise nothing bad is gonna happen. Try to imagine a physicist. Do you have a picture in your head? If so, open your eyes again. I would like to ask you to raise your hand if you thought about someone, a guy wearing very thick glasses, sitting in front of the computer all day long. Okay, raise your hand if you thought about someone wearing a hoodie, maybe looking a little bit like a Mark Zuckerberg. You raised your hand multiple times? Okay. Please raise your hand if you thought about someone who looks like Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory. Or a guy wearing a band shirt with a ponytail, maybe. Okay, so we don't have any real physicists in the room, apparently. And raise your hand if you thought about someone who looks like me. Wow, thank you very much for your hand raises. That is awesome. Usually I do not get very many hand raises when I ask this question. But my name is Laura and I'm a physicist, a female physicist. When I tell people in conversations what I studied and what I do, I usually get faces like, mm-hmm. And then they slowly turn around and leave our conversation. Or sometimes say things like, oh yeah, that must be really tough, I assume. Okay. I grew up in the rural areas of northern Germany. I am the oldest of two daughters to my parents and was the first one in my family to go to university and to study. And my surrounding was not always very supportive of this decision. Very often I heard things like, are you sure you want to go to university? Do you really think this is worth the time and money? You are a woman, you're gonna stay at home, you're gonna have kids anyway, so it's just a waste of time and resources if you pursue your interests. But I did. I went off to university and I became a female physicist. And maybe it's because I heard things like, you're not good enough to do this, you're not brave enough to be a year away from your family when you had just turned 16, or you're just not smart enough to be a physicist, way too often, that I personally think that education, especially in the combination with women empowerment, is so important. Because proper education is the key. It's a key to a self-fulfilling life, but even more importantly, especially in a context with women again, for a self-dependent life. It brings you self-confidence, it brings you self-esteem, and allows you to be an active member of society. And I often talk with my mom. My mom is a substitute teacher in an elementary school. So from her, I hear a lot of stories about what is going on in the German school system especially. And what I hear, I find really, really troublesome, to be honest. She is telling me that the kids do not learn how to spell anymore. The kids do not have to pay attention in class anymore if they do not want to. They don't have to do homework anymore, it's all voluntary. And what troubles me the most is that they are not being prepared with the skills that are actually needed in the 21st century. So there is very limited access in schools, for example, to computers, and the kids are not trained on these skills, which are more or less the basis of what you really need to know, no matter what kind of job you're going to pursue later on in life. So education is key. And it is not only the key for the future of an individual child, but also for us as society as a whole. And therefore, everyone is just invited, and it's our responsibility to really step up and ensure that we actively engage in the creation of excellent learning and education opportunities for everyone.
So, just like Laura started off the whole conversation about people having to close their eyes in order to figure out whether she's an engineer, I'm not asking you guys to close your eyes because you certainly don't have to, but who would have imagined that I'm German? Well, probably not a lot of you guys, but obviously Germany has become a multicultural society, and therefore there are also a lot of people of African descent there currently residing in Germany. But it's always nice that I get a quick laugh about that. My name is Emmanuel Lubansadio. Like I already said, I'm from Germany originally, born and raised, but my parents are from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And it's really the reason why I'm so motivated and super passionate about education is because of Africa and my parents. For instance, my parents left the DRC in the 70s in order for them to pursue an education in Europe. And while pursuing this education in Europe, my parents weren't really about staying in Europe and having a good time, but my parents were always passionate about returning to Africa, to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. However, certain things occurred politically and economic-wise, which is the reason why my parents actually ended up staying in Germany. However, my parents never wanted to stay in Germany. My parents always dreamed of having a future back home in their country, in the Congo. They were so looking forward to building up the country, but those of you who are familiar with the issues currently going on in the Congo ever since the country gained its independence will be familiar with those occurrences that have occurred in the Congo. So therefore, I grew up in Germany, which I'm definitely thankful about, since I was able to pursue an education, and my education has definitely made up my current outlook on life. It has definitely enabled me to pursue a career in politics, which I'm currently working in. However, I've comprehended that education is quite key in order for people to find their place in society, in order for them to build their societies, their respective societies. And I feel like a lot of times there's this misconception of migrants wanting to migrate just for the sake of migrating. No, I deeply believe, just like my parents, they would like to stay in their countries and make themselves available for their countries, for the development of their countries, but sometimes they're not able to. So that's the reason why I'm super motivated, for instance, about Africa in particular, about creating opportunities in Africa. But I've gotten to realize that youth unemployment is a big issue, and Laura and I are passionate about the topic, and we'll be speaking about youth unemployment in general, globally, but we also focus on the MENA region and Africa. So looking forward to providing you certain insights about youth unemployability, but not so youth unemployability, but also about the people. The people, the youth, who according to professional terms may not be considered entrepreneurs, because we often consider entrepreneurs the Mark Zuckerbergs of this world. However, while traveling the country of my parents and other regions, in the MENA region and also in Africa, I've got to learn that people there are just natural entrepreneurs. I mean, for instance, there are so many examples that we'll provide you with, so many examples that we'll provide you on the slides, but so therefore bear with us. But Laura will start off introducing the whole subject of youth unemployability, providing you an outlook of the MENA region. And so Laura got to start. Thank you very much.
So what we're going to do is showcase a little bit the MENA region. So in general, the MENA region, as most of you I'm sure are familiar with, is an acronym for Middle East and North Africa. It is a very large region stretching across multiple countries, and we'll be showing you a map in just a second. The population in this region builds up about 6% of the world's total population, and is estimated to be around 381 million people. And as we all know, this region has really brought us a lot of knowledge. It is culturally very rich. So from here we know about things like coffee, about lettering, about water systems, about the calendar even. But also today, the MENA region plays a very important role in a geo-economically and geopolitical context because it holds about 1/3 of the world's oil reserves and about 60% of the petroleum reserves.
So obviously, I'm sure you're familiar with the MENA region as a whole, but one thing that always often occurs when people speak about certain regions, as also happens with Africa, the MENA region obviously is not a single country, right? It's an entire region made up of different countries, and that's something that definitely needs to be emphasized, and different countries have their own particular issues. Similar to Europe, consisting of 27 countries now after Brexit. However, so we just address in the MENA region as a case study, but we do comprehend the fact that MENA region comprises different countries. As I said earlier, the young men and young ladies currently residing in these countries, but also at the remainder of the globe, are certainly the future. And one thing which since they are the future, it's quite pertinent to find ways to engage the youth, but also not only engage youth, but creating opportunities and foster opportunities for youth to flourish within their respective fields of passions and fields of studies. You can go ahead.
So we also brought you some numbers. The share of the youth in the MENA region is a lot higher than in other global countries. So for example, you can see here on the map, I just want to exemplify two cases of Egypt and Yemen, for example. So in Egypt, we have about 22.76 million people who are in the age group of 15 to 29, which actually make up about 31% of the working age population and around 20% of the country's population. And in Yemen, we have a little less population in millions. It's only around 8 million people. However, the working age population that ranges in the age group of 15 to 29 is actually very high with 37%. And also there, this age group builds up about 22% of the entire population in the country. So by just having a look at those numbers, you can really see that youth, compared to other regions in the world, is a big part of the population, not only of the total population, but also of the working age population within the MENA countries. And this, of course, brings, again, with a rising share of young people, some challenges which we're going to take a look at now. Of course, the challenges which are outlined here are not exclusively to be mapped onto the MENA region. You can also take a look at those in other regions, such if you take female workforce participation, for example. That is not only part or a characteristic of the MENA region. Also in Germany, we hit a high in 2018 with 55% of female workforce participation. It has never been that high before, but still it's only half of the population, half of the female population that is actually contributing. So there are some deficiencies that really need to be tackled and to take a look at. Studies suggest that, especially in the rural areas, there is lower female workforce participation due, for example, to cultural or family aspects. We can see that all over the world that a lot of women actually decide, for example, when they have children, not to continue working if there is a possibility of them to stay at home rather than contribute to the workforce. And it is really important to identify the underlying mechanisms and reasons for this particular behavior.
Well, skills, well, I'll address the skill mismatch. For those who may not be familiar with the term, skill mismatch refers to rather the occurrence where the potential workers are not equipped with the skills they need in order to succeed in a working force, which is an occurrence that has been quite expressed globally. Looking at Germany, it's quite interesting because we do have a shortage of manual laborers, because there's this oftentimes misconception that in order for people, particularly in Europe and Germany as itself, to succeed, they do require a university education. But however, university is not for everybody, and particularly looking at Germany, there are ways in order for you or people to find their ways into the working force. For instance, we do have vocational training opportunities that are provided. So those that do not attend university get into a business and work for a corporation and as trainees for 3 days a week, but then on the remaining 2 days, they do visit school to get a practical part, but also the theoretical part. So that's a good way to address the skill mismatch. But however, the skill mismatch is quite pertinent and needs to be definitely addressed in order to encounter youth unemployability.
And this does not only refer to, for example, tertiary education, but can also be traced to primary and secondary education. As well, as I was initially mentioning, there is a lot to be done in terms of digital inclusion. Kids and teenagers, as well as older people, all of them need to have access and to be trained in the skill set that is really required for the 21st century. It is not only about teaching them on how to handle computers, but it's also about teaching them the responsible usage of computers and digital media in general. And we cannot just wait until policymakers maybe decide when is the right time to push forward programs that do that. But it's up to us as individuals to really support this progress. And in this part, I would like to mention some initiatives that we have been doing as the Global Shapers and projects that have been implemented across various nations is actually that we teach kids in coding schools how to acquire those skills. So for example, as a project of the Frankfurt Global Shapers Hub, we just kicked off an event series about 2 weeks ago, which focuses on underprivileged youth and teenagers and aims to equip them with those skills and the technology and resources that is needed for them to not only learn the basics of the computer, but also to actively participate in life, more or less, because they need those media in order to, for example, apply for a job, to write their CV, to do their homework, to really have a chance in life, to search for housing when they move out. So this is a very, very, very important point that I really would like to emphasize, and I would like to encourage all of you to step out there and support young children, especially the ones who do not have or have very limited access to media, to acquire those skills. So we already talked a little bit about what can be done on a small scale. Like, for example, we have been doing with this project, or I'm sure all of you can mention similar initiatives that you kicked off in your home countries. But what could also be done on a larger scale? So we would suggest that everywhere around the world, public-private partnership initiatives should conduct household surveys, which will help them to gather data and then identify and monitor inequalities and imbalances in their educational systems, and establish a system to really monitor the learning outcomes. Because yesterday we also learned when it's about impact, output and outcome are not necessarily the same things. And although there has been a lot of spending already to push forward enrollment rates in tertiary education, governments should really continue the investment in human capital, because our future relies on the human capital, right? I mean, education is key for a society to push forward, but also do this in a very inclusive approach, focusing on the ones that are left behind, focusing and identifying why women are less likely to, for example, use social media to educate themselves, or do not as often enroll in secondary and tertiary education as men.
So policymakers create a regulatory framework for businesses to flourish and for businesses to engage within a certain framework. So therefore, to implement policy measures that foster targeted skills is quite pertinent in this issue. And one way what a good example for that is the country of, again, Germany, which has introduced vocational training measures and schemes where people are not necessarily trained overall, but rather trained within specific sectors and according to their fields of interest. For instance, someone who would like to become a mechanic will join a company like Mercedes and do like an apprenticeship, which really consists of 2 days conducting practical work at the company, and the remaining 3 or 2 days, depending on the company, attend school and to get the theoretical framework. That's point 3. But as regards to point 4, we are definitely in support of SDG 17. SDG 17 speaks of to find ways to engage the public, as well as the private sector. So to find a combination of both. Because both are definitely important, and one good way for that could be maybe regional integration schemes that could be implemented where people meet, or policymakers from those different regions meet in order to discuss certain ways how to address the issue of youth unemployability in education. So, what is our main take-home message as a whole? We've discussed different issues like skills mismatch. We've discussed issues of policymakers, how they can address it, but our main take-home message is definitely that the youth is the future of any country, be it the MENA region and also in Europe, and one thing that we cannot afford to neglect the youth. So therefore it's quite important to implement measures that definitely feed into certain issues that have been going on within certain regions, for instance in Europe also, and because the youth happens to be innovative. Oftentimes when we speak about the youth, and we kind of looked upon them and say, well, there are certain issues. Yes, there are certain issues, but the youth is definitely an aspect that really needs to be driven, motivated, and pushed, definitely. So, as some of you may know, necessity is the mother of all invention. That's one thing I definitely discovered during some of my travels in the region, within certain regions, but also during my university studies, where if you lack a certain thing, you just try to come up with a solution to fix certain things. So a good example of a university invention in Germany, where necessity met the need and enforced invention, could be looked upon on this slide. So who would guess what that is? That's supposed to be water heater, right? So made out of some German university. Look, that's also creative, but yeah, go ahead, take it.
We actually do want to showcase like really cool technologies that have already been established. And there is one Egyptian approach which tackles the issue of water shortage by converting seawater into actual drinking water. So what is done, I just want to bring you through the process very quickly, is that you take the ocean water, you basically remove all particles from it that could interfere with the later, with the step 2 process, and basically perform then a reverse osmosis. So for those of you who are not familiar with chemistry anymore and have never been, that is no issue. What is actually done in this step is just the salt is being removed from the seawater, and then in the third step, further minerals and or chemicals are being added to assure water quality standards and meet the health requirements. And then it is actually drinkable. So that is a very awesome approach tackling a very important issue, namely the issue of water shortage. Also, another very awesome invention that has been saving a lot of lives is the life straw. The life straw also contains a filter membrane which purifies the water in the end and removes all kinds of contaminants from water, and is thereby protecting especially the ones who do not have access to clean water in some of the remote areas of the world. And this is actually helping because it reduces the risk of diarrhea a lot, and every year around 1.5 million people still die from this disease. So the life straw is saving lives. Another very awesome example from the Philippines is Litter of Light, and I really, really like this approach due to its simplicity. The guy who came up with this is a genius, really. So what it does is you take an empty plastic bottle, which everyone has, I'm sure. Then you need some galvanized steel, which could, for example, be a metal roofing. You punch a hole in it, put it over the bottle. This is actually just the fixation later on to install it somewhere. Water is being put into the bottle along with bleach, and then your solar cell is already ready to go. This is a lamp that has been installed in hundreds of houses already, bringing light to places where you don't have electrical power, and it is just such a neat approach and such an economically and ecologically sustainable approach to create light that I'm just in love with this idea, because I just think it's really, really awesome.
Well, obviously, there are certain reasons where electricity outages and power outages are a quite serious issue. And as this picture shows, with a simple electricity grid, these people have been coming up with an electricity grid that provides entire villages with electricity without then being conducted or service provided by established companies. Can you go to the next one? But the one thing that really drove it home for me, and which again reaffirmed the fact that our youth are the future, is this innovation. Those beautiful 6 little children came up with a mobile application that detects fake medicines. Those of you who are familiar with pharmaceuticals and medicines may know that within certain regions there are fake medicines circulating societies. They either lack a certain dosage of the ingredient or are not filled with the ingredient at all. And that's quite a pertinent issue when it comes to HIV medicines or malaria medicines. And what these girls came up with without previous knowledge of tech and knowing how to code, they received obviously some help, but they came up with an invention which is able to detect fake medicines. And I can show you the example because the European Union recently passed this directive. It's called the Falsified Medicines Directive, and it's pretty much addressing the issue of falsified medicines. And I don't know how many years it took the European Union until they addressed this issue, but just in comparison, this issue was tackled by 6 little kids.
If you give women a task, they're just gonna follow through on it and finish the project.
No, but then again reaffirms that the youth and people usually possess the skills to evoke a certain change within society. It's just up to policymakers and the private sector to capitalize upon those skills and provide the resources for those to flourish. And this educational mobile application also really touched me because it's a Karim and Jana mobile educational application. It's geared towards primary education kids. It provides a service of calculating, mathematics, and also language skills. So that's another way to address, an issue and make children literate. And that's a good way of showing an example, which was also founded in cooperation with the Queen Rania Foundation. So what is the take-home of this session and the slides as a whole is that, we can not only connect entrepreneurship with the Mark Zuckerbergs of this world, because I believe that there's an entrepreneurial spirit within all of us. It's just a matter of either finding that passion, but also for the private sector and the public sector to provide the resources for those to discover those resources. I mean, all over the world, there are so many subsistence entrepreneurs that find a way to manage daily life with their daily inventions. So it's just a matter for policymakers and the private sector to find a way to bring that to fruition, and then they provide the resources.
And now we would like to invite you to share some insights of your countries where you maybe pushed forward in educating teens, kids, or other groups in small initiatives or even larger governmental initiatives.
Yeah, or even if there are questions, they may also be posed. Do we have a mic?
There is someone. Okay. I asked for a mic, but apparently there's none. I'm just going to come to you. Maybe you can use my mic for now. So we're going to improvise.
All right. My name is Anatoly Chirigwa Joe, and I'm coming from Uganda. I came here as a person to pitch in the GIST competition, and I'm very excited to say that we won. We won the first place for the idea stage.
Congratulations.
And yeah, we are winners.
Congrats.
So I'm very excited to hear what you guys are sharing. It's knowledge, it's wisdom, and that's what we are all seeking for. So in our country, Uganda, last year, a report that was published revealed that Uganda was one of the most entrepreneurial countries.
Nice.
But the bad side of it all, the report continued to say that not maybe 95% of these entrepreneurs see their first birthday or even the second one. And that really terrifies us very much. So people have the ability to innovate, but these ideas don't see a chance to celebrate their second or even their first birthday. So things like this, the Global Entrepreneurship Conference, meeting people like you, continue to prove to us that the knowledge we are seeking for will let us go through even our 10th birthday, 30th birthday, and create a legacy that no one can be able to suppress. So my concern at this point is very many people in our country have not gone to school. They have not been able to complete their university, but they're actually the one that are leading the startups. Like the hub where I sit, most of us have not got the chance to finish our university. But what do you think for the facilities that are supposed to be pushed to people who cannot reach the university, maybe through an innovation hub, the one where I sit, and it's not just to be formal in a university or somewhere else. So what is your take? Because for us, our concern right now, in my neighborhoods, there's a lot of break-ins. People break in and different several assaults are being caused to women's and properties are taken. These people get $5 a day, buys a TV, but the guy comes and takes it in one day. And this was the reason for us to create the startup called Yunga, which is a local rescue digital network for communities in the neighborhoods that allows them to mobilize themselves in case there's an attack or an emergency. So what happens is people install our simple devices in their rooms, and then by a tap of a button, all the network, the security agencies and everyone come to rescue in the shortest time possible. We have so far got 30 people that have paid 30% to use the device. That's a pre-order model. And we are hoping from here, we should be able to pilot this and see how it works. But I'll be very grateful if you tell us how you're willing to come down to people who have not seen their degree or a master's and see how you can help anyway. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You want to address it?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thanks for your question. Really appreciate it. And also for sharing the work that you guys have been doing to address a certain issue within your respective community. I'm of the opinion that it really, oh, am I not speaking in the mic?
It's okay.
Okay. No, I'm of the opinion that it definitely requires a public-private partnership to address it, right? Because so it's a government's job to protect its citizens, right? So it's the government's job to ensure that you can live within a respective society without having fear of your possessions being taken. You know, that's a job that the government needs to do, and oftentimes, in many regions, the government doesn't really, and it's really the people who've been pushing change, you know, and I think it really starts with the government setting the requirement, well, the basic, which is protecting its citizens. But then there's also the private sector, which obviously possesses the resources to allocate those towards people who are motivated and wanted to create a change, you know, to take an innovation which is subsistence and enabling you guys to be transformational, which you are in your respective context, you already are. So really my advice, and I don't even want to say that I could provide you an advice because I do not live within your respective society. So I don't want to say that I know what you're going through because I do not, you know. But one thing I can say for sure is that government needs to protect its citizens and ensure that its citizens can live their respective lives, you know, and go on about education and business. But in a public-private manner. So that's the only thing I can definitely give you, which is not even an advice, because I do not what you guys are going through, but it's just my take on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Ahmed Bakr from Bahrain.
Hi.
I've just got two questions I'd like to ask.
Sure.
From your presentation, I gather you're speaking from German experience. So I'd like to know what percentage of the workforce in Germany today is between the age of 15 and 25, taking into consideration the foreign influx of immigrants?
To be honest, I cannot answer that question. I can tell you, though, that youth unemployment, and I suppose the definition of youth is also the UN definition, is currently at around 6%.
And in Germany, does the private sector get any incentives, tax cuts from the government for investing or contributing towards education for those people in the workforce?
Unfortunately, I cannot provide you with a precise answer, but I mean, the vocational training system in Germany has been in place for so many years. So therefore, besides the university track, there's been always this I would say this appreciation for skilled labor, right? Because Germany being a manufacturing heavy country, it's been always benefited from manufacturing. So I do not know whether there are specific tax cuts, but just in regards to Germany's history, particularly being manufacturing orientated, there's been always an appreciation for manufacturing jobs. Yeah.
So we just have also the numbers. So age structure. Is this unemployment? This is but unemployment? Okay, 10% of the Okay, 10% of the total population ages between 15 and 24 years currently. I
can check the youth unemployment rate.
Okay. Yeah, just to add on the
yes.
number. Sorry.
Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, anyway, my name is Mokitsi Tekera from Botswana. So I look after the Gen chapter in Botswana. So I'm also an entrepreneur in the education space. So I just want to say, what have you have actually presented on the coding, introduction of coding at school level. I think this is certainly something that's key for especially African countries to really infuse early on learning of innovation and creativity, so that we don't have ultimately, skills mismatch in the industry. So for example, in Botswana, we're working with a German multinational company called SAP. We were actually deploying about, in over 100 schools. We were teaching children from like primary school all the way to secondary school coding. But also I think it should be important to say with such partnerships to bring the private sector along. To infuse knowledge from companies so that university graduates ultimately also have the experience of this. And I think the German model is something that should be of interest, particularly in the application of tech for mostly a lot of African countries, so that there's more solutions that could be developed that are really practical. That solve problem, for example, for the African continent. So I just want to applaud you, say what you have just presented is exactly what a lot of us are doing in the continent. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And maybe I can say one sentence to that. It's, while traveling Africa and other regions, one thing I've noticed is the people are really willing to do, and people often lack the resources, but they are really willing to do. And this is the first thing that it takes in order to really evoke true change, right? So, but me working in policy, that's a responsibility that I also take it upon the government, to create an environment for foreign direct investment to come to a certain region, to enforce those public-private partnerships. And I think Botswana is a good example, and South Africa is one as well. But there are other regions where governments do not provide corporations with the investment security, but really looking upon the people, it's the people who are driving to change, within their respective means. And it's quite encouraging to hear about such an initiative that SAP has been pushing in Botswana. Yeah.
Any other thoughts, additions? If not, thank you very much for sharing your stories. I hope we could give you some insights to the topic and what could be done. If you want to continue working on ideas and initiatives that you maybe had during the presentation or got some inspiration from what the audience shared with us today, please stay here. We're going to continue in about 15 minutes with a design sprint on education, pushing forward novel ideas. So it would be great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.